16 hours. That's all it took for a young woman's leap of faith to turn into a nightmare she would never wake from. When 26-year-old Clara Mendoza boarded her flight to Florida, she thought she was stepping into the kind of love story people daydream about. Months of late-night calls, shared secrets, and whispered promises had convinced her this trip was worth the risk. She believed she was finally meeting the man who called her his safe place. Instead, she stepped into the arms of someone carrying a truth so dangerous it would cost her life. Here's the question that lingers: how well do we really know the people we trust online? Would you be able to spot the cracks in someone's carefully constructed mask before it's too late? Or would their charm blind you to the danger? Clara's story is not just about romance gone wrong. It's about the way lies can be dressed as affection, how danger can hide behind the glow of a phone screen, and how quickly one decision can rewrite everything. Stay with me, because in the next few minutes you'll hear how a teacher from Indiana, cautious yet hopeful, walked straight into the trap of a man who lived behind lies. You'll see how a single mistake exposed his secret, and why he was willing to silence her forever rather than let the truth come out. Before we dive deeper, let me ask, if you've ever trusted someone you met online, or know someone who has, drop a comment below. Your engagement helps others see stories like this, and it might just remind someone to be more cautious before their own leap of faith. Clara Mendoza grew up in the small town of Terre Haute, Indiana. Her childhood was modest but filled with warmth. Her parents, Elena and Raphael, were first-generation immigrants who worked tirelessly, her mother at a local clinic and her father in a factory, to give Clara and her younger brother, Matteo, a chance at stability. Clara was the kind of daughter who carried quiet responsibility on her shoulders. Even as a child, she preferred books and sketchpads to parties, the kind of girl who collected pressed flowers and taught herself songs on the guitar. Teaching came naturally to her. After finishing college with a degree in early childhood education, Clara returned home and found joy in guiding children through their first steps of learning. Her students adored her. She sang math problems, turned spelling tests into games, and always had a jar of candy for rewards. But outside the classroom, her life was quieter, lonelier. Friends often teased her for being cautious to the point of isolation. Clara rarely dated, and when she did, it never seemed to last. Trust, for her, was not easily given. That's what made Ethan Rowe stand out. She met him in a photography forum, a space she used to unwind after long school days. Ethan claimed to be a freelance graphic designer from Fort Lauderdale who loved urban photography. He posted photos of sunlit streets, storm clouds over beaches, and coffee shops where he said he worked on projects. At first, their exchanges were light, a comment on a photo, a joke about editing software. But soon, conversations moved to private messages, then calls, then nightly video chats. Ethan made her laugh in ways no one else had. Her closest friend, Naomi Torres, noticed the change right away. Clara began smiling at her phone in the teacher's lounge, humming between classes, and staying up later than usual. When Naomi pressed for details, Clara confessed, "I think I finally met someone who understands me." Naomi tried to be supportive but couldn't ignore the unease. "Clara, you don't really know him. 8 months of phone calls doesn't erase that fact." Still, Ethan had answers for every doubt. When Clara wondered if his work was real, he showed her a portfolio. When she asked to see his life, he tilted his phone around what looked like a tidy apartment, complete with plants on the windowsill. He remembered her birthday, sent her playlists, and even called to check on her when she had a fever. For someone like Clara, who had always put others first, being cared for felt intoxicating. Yet the red flags were there, faint but undeniable. Ethan avoided conversations about meeting her family. He deflected questions about his past relationships. Sometimes, late at night, he would grow irritable if she didn't respond quickly enough, accusing her of drifting away. Clara brushed it off as insecurity, the kind of thing people work through once they meet face to face. Then came the turning point. Ethan bought her a plane ticket. He insisted it was his gift, a chance to finally prove everything he'd said was true. No excuses, he told her. This weekend, it's just you and me. Clara hesitated. It wasn't like her to accept such bold gestures, but Ethan was persuasive. He painted the trip as a chance to step out of her routine, to experience Florida's warmth after months of gray Indiana skies. Against her better judgment, and Naomi's warnings, she agreed. Her family knew she was traveling, though she downplayed the details. It's just a quick visit with a friend, she told her mother. Elena hugged her tightly at the airport, uneasy but trusting her daughter's judgment. Clara promised to text as soon as she landed. Meanwhile, Ethan's reality was far from the story he had woven. He wasn't a successful freelancer but a man living under probation. His past was marked by violent encounters, bar fights, threats to former girlfriends, court-mandated anger management classes. He had learned how to present himself as charming, even gentle, when it suited him. Online, he was free to create the version of himself he wanted Clara to see. Friends of Ethan would later describe him as unpredictable. At times, he could be magnetic, the life of the room. At others, he grew sullen, paranoid, convinced people were out to expose him. He kept most of his relationships shallow, unwilling to let anyone close enough to see the cracks in his facade. But Clara, with her trusting heart, had slipped past his defenses. The stage was set before her plane ever touched down, a woman searching for love, a man desperate to control the narrative of his life, and a trip that would bring those worlds colliding. Every small red flag Clara ignored, every uneasy instinct she quieted, would soon return with devastating clarity. Clara's first evening in Florida began with promise. Ethan had cooked pasta, opened a bottle of wine, and turned on soft music in the background. At first, Clara convinced herself the uneasiness she felt during the car ride was just nerves. They laughed over dinner, shared stories, and toasted to finally meeting in person. But the warmth didn't last. Ethan grew distracted, checking his phone constantly, frowning at incoming messages. Clara excused herself to the bathroom, and on her way back noticed his phone buzzing on the counter. Against her instincts, she glanced at the screen. The text that glowed back at her shattered everything. Where are you? You missed your check-in. Officer Martinez will want to know why. Curiosity overpowered caution. Clara scrolled through more messages, uncovering a trail of lies, conversations with multiple women, reminders from a probation officer, and evidence that his carefully painted life was a facade. Her stomach dropped. The man who had called her his safe place wasn't who he claimed at all. When Clara confronted him, Ethan's smile evaporated. His voice sharpened. You weren't supposed to see that. What followed was pieced together later from neighbor statements, digital records, and forensic evidence. Witnesses reported raised voices around midnight. One woman, awake with her infant, told investigators she heard a single scream followed by silence. Clara's final moments were desperate. She demanded to leave, insisting she would call a taxi. Ethan, fearful she might expose his probation status and furious at her discovery, snapped. Prosecutors would later argue it was a lethal mix of rage and paranoia. By the time the night ended, Clara never walked out of his home alive. By dawn, Ethan's Dodge Charger was spotted on a surveillance camera near the Everglades. He appeared alone, hauling a large duffel bag toward a canal. Hours later, he returned without it. Inside the house, Clara's belongings remained untouched, her suitcase near the door, shoes by the entryway, and her phone powered off on a side table. When Clara's best friend Naomi couldn't reach her by Saturday morning, alarm bells rang. Clara was known for her reliability, she never failed to check in after traveling. Naomi called repeatedly until Ethan answered once, tersely saying Clara was sleeping off the jet lag. His cold tone unsettled her. Unable to shake the dread, Naomi contacted local authorities and begged them to conduct a welfare check. Police arrived at Ethan's home late Saturday morning. He greeted them calmly, insisting Clara had left after an argument the night before. But the inconsistencies were glaring. If she had left, Why were her bags still there? Why was her phone off? Officers noted her shoes at the entrance, positioned as if she had just come in, not left. Ethan's composure raised suspicion. Detectives pressed him for details, but his timeline shifted under questioning. First, he claimed she left around 1 a.m. Then, when confronted with neighbors' reports of shouting, he amended the story. Within hours, investigators secured a search warrant. Inside the house, forensic teams found strands of Clara's hair near the living room rug and traces of blood that had been hastily cleaned. The couch cushions were damp, smelling faintly of bleach. Investigators bagged Ethan's clothing, noting inconsistencies in what he claimed to have worn that night. Cell tower data placed Ethan's phone near the canal during the early hours of the morning. Combined with surveillance footage, the evidence painted a troubling picture. Divers were dispatched to the canal where cameras had caught Ethan's car. By late afternoon, they recovered a waterlogged duffel bag. Inside were Clara's remains, bound in blankets from Ethan's house. The discovery confirmed the worst. Ethan was brought in for questioning. At first, he maintained his story. Clara left after a fight. When detectives presented the footage from the canal, he shifted again. He claimed Clara had died accidentally during an argument and he panicked, disposing of her body instead of calling for help. But the evidence contradicted his narrative. The autopsy revealed signs of manual strangulation and defensive wounds on Clara's arms, suggesting she had fought for her life. The medical examiner ruled her death a homicide. Detectives pressed further. Why had he lied about her leaving? Why was bleach used to clean his living room? Why were there messages from a probation officer about check-ins he had ignored? Each question chipped away at his credibility. Ethan grew agitated, demanding a lawyer. News of Clara's disappearance and the grisly discovery spread quickly. Local stations ran footage of the canal search, while national outlets picked up the story of a teacher killed by her online boyfriend. Parents from Clara's school held a vigil, lighting candles and leaving notes that read, "We love you, Miss Mendoza." Community leaders urged caution about online relationships, warning young women not to travel without safeguards. For Naomi, the guilt was unbearable. She told reporters, "I warned her, but she wanted to believe in love. I just wish I had pushed harder." Meanwhile, Ethan's mugshot flashed across television screens. Court records revealed his violent past. Restraining orders filed by former girlfriends, probation for aggravated assault, and a string of arrests that should have been red flags long before Clara ever boarded her flight. The revelation fueled outrage. How had someone with such a record been able to lure another victim under supervision? By the end of the weekend, Ethan Rowe was charged with second-degree murder. Investigators made it clear, his carefully curated persona had collapsed under the weight of truth, and Clara's discovery of his hidden life had triggered the deadly confrontation. The community mourned the loss of a bright young teacher, while prosecutors prepared for a trial that promised to expose the depth of Ethan's deception. By Sunday morning, after divers recovered the duffel bag from the canal, detectives knew Ethan Rowe could no longer bluff his way out. They placed him in handcuffs in front of his Fort Lauderdale home while cameras rolled. His expression was vacant, as though the weight of exposure had finally crushed the mask he wore. Reporters crowded the street, shouting questions about Clara. Neighbors who had once nodded politely at Ethan now gawked at him like he was a stranger. He was taken into custody without incident, charged initially with second-degree murder and evidence tampering. At his first appearance, prosecutors painted Ethan as a manipulator who carefully lured Clara into his home, only to kill her when she discovered the truth about his probation and deception. They emphasized the premeditation implied by cleaning the crime scene and disposing of her body. The defense countered by portraying the incident as a tragic accident, a heated argument that escalated beyond Ethan's control. His attorney argued that Ethan panicked, fearing the probation system would throw him back in jail, and that his disposal of Clara's body was a poor decision made under duress rather than proof of intent to kill. The judge denied bail, citing Ethan's violent history and risk of flight. The prosecution's case was built on layers of evidence. Surveillance footage showed Ethan dragging the duffel bag to the canal. Forensic teams found traces of Clara's blood and hair fibers inside his home. The autopsy confirmed cause of death as manual strangulation, not an accident. Most damning was his digital trail. Text messages revealed reminders from his probation officer, contradicting his graphic designer persona. Dating app conversations with other women showed a pattern of deception that prosecutors argued made Clara's death part of a broader scheme to manipulate and control. They also introduced testimony from former girlfriends who described frightening encounters with Ethan, threats, sudden bursts of violence, and attempts to isolate them. Though the defense tried to limit these as prejudicial, the judge allowed some testimony, citing its relevance to establishing intent. Ethan's lawyers leaned heavily on the angle of panic and poor judgment. They insisted Clara's death was not premeditated but the tragic result of an argument spiraling out of control. They emphasized that Ethan did not flee the state, instead returning home after disposing of the body, which they claimed showed confusion rather than calculated planning. They also floated a false accusation, suggesting Clara might have harmed herself after the confrontation, and Ethan, terrified of being blamed due to his probation status, staged the disposal. This argument fell apart when the medical examiner testified about the defensive wounds on Clara's arms, proving she fought back. In closing statements, the defense appealed to the jury's sense of humanity, asking them to see Ethan not as a monster but as a flawed man who made devastating mistakes. The case became a national headline. True crime programs featured Clara's story, warning about the risks of online relationships. Commentators debated whether probation officers had failed by not monitoring Ethan more closely. Hashtags circulated on social media, #JusticeForClara and #SaferDating. The media attention created intense pressure on the justice system. Prosecutors spoke in interviews about the importance of holding Ethan accountable, while defense attorneys complained that the coverage poisoned the jury pool. The court eventually sequestered jurors during deliberations to shield them from constant news updates. Clara's family filled the courtroom each day, wearing pins with her photo. Her mother broke down during testimony describing Clara's last text message, "Landed safe. Love you." Her father, usually stoic, clenched his fists as prosecutors displayed Ethan's duffel bag on a projector screen. Outside the courthouse, candlelight vigils were held in Clara's honor. Parents from her school wrote letters describing her impact on children and argued that her death robbed the community of someone irreplaceable. Naomi testified about their friendship, her warnings, and the anguish of realizing she was right. Her testimony cut deep, showing how Clara's hope for love blinded her to the danger. Mid-trial, Ethan's defense team attempted a surprising move. They sought a plea deal to downgrade the charge to manslaughter in exchange for a shorter sentence. Prosecutors refused, stating the deliberate steps Ethan took, cleaning the scene, disposing of the body, lying to authorities, proved intent and demanded a full trial. Another twist came when a former cellmate of Ethan's reached out to prosecutors, claiming Ethan had bragged in jail about how he knew how to get women to trust him. Though the defense tried to dismiss the inmate's testimony as unreliable, it reinforced the pattern of manipulation prosecutors highlighted. The final blow was forensic evidence on Ethan's clothing. Fibers matching the blanket used to wrap Clara's body were found on his shirt, disproving his shifting stories about the night. After weeks of testimony, the prosecution stood firm. Ethan Rowe killed Clara because she uncovered the lies that kept his life together. The defense, unable to shake the mounting evidence, could only ask for leniency. As the jury prepared for deliberation, the weight of the case extended beyond the courtroom. It was no longer just about one man and one victim. It became a reflection of how fragile trust can be, how systems can fail, and how easily love can be weaponized. The stage was set for the verdict that would decide Ethan's fate. The courtroom was packed each day of the trial. Reporters filled the gallery, sketch artists captured every expression, and Clara's family sat silently in the front row, their grief visible in every clenched jaw and tear-stained cheek. The judge, aware of the case's media spotlight, repeatedly reminded jurors to focus only on the evidence, not the headlines outside. The tension in the room was thick as prosecutors began laying out the sequence of events. Photographs of Clara's belongings, her suitcase by the door, her shoes neatly placed, were projected on screens. The prosecution argued these details told a clear story: Clara never left Ethan's home voluntarily. One of the most powerful moments came from Naomi Torres. Her voice wavered as she described Clara's excitement about the trip and the dread she felt when messages went unanswered. "She always texted me after a flight. Always," Naomi testified, pausing to wipe away tears. Her testimony underscored Clara's reliability, making Ethan's claim that she suddenly stormed out all the more implausible. Forensic experts followed. They explained how traces of blood were detected beneath the living room rug despite attempts to clean it. A crime scene analyst showed microscopic fibers from the blanket recovered in the canal matching those in Ethan's home. The medical examiner was unflinching: the cause of death was manual strangulation. There were defensive wounds consistent with the victim attempting to fight back. The jury watched intently as these findings dismantled the defense's claim of an accident. Midway through the trial, prosecutors introduced a series of text messages Ethan had sent to another woman just days before Clara's visit. In them, he promised a future together, mirroring the same affectionate words he had once sent Clara. The revelation sparked gasps in the gallery. The prosecution argued this showed a pattern of manipulation. That Clara was not his only love, but one of many caught in his lies. Perhaps most damning was surveillance footage of Ethan near the Everglades Canal. The grainy video showed him dragging the heavy duffel bag before dawn. Prosecutors paused the footage frame by frame, hammering home the point: this was no accident. This was concealment. Ethan's lawyers fought to minimize the impact. They called character witnesses who described him as misunderstood and capable of change. They argued the cleanup was the panicked act of a man terrified of returning to prison. They tried to poke holes in the timeline, suggesting the exact moment of Clara's death couldn't be pinned down. But each effort crumbled under cross-examination. When a defense witness claimed Ethan was gentle by nature, the prosecution countered with restraining order documents and police reports from previous girlfriends who described violent outbursts. When the defense suggested Clara might have left and later returned, prosecutors reminded the jury her phone was found powered off inside the house. The defense's narrative weakened day by day, unable to withstand the mounting evidence. Ethan himself took the stand, against the advice of some of his legal team. His testimony was cold and inconsistent. He claimed Clara overreacted after discovering his probation status and insisted her death was an accident. Under cross-examination, when asked why he chose to hide her body instead of calling 911, his composure cracked. "I didn't know what else to do," he snapped. The jury's eyes narrowed. The prosecution had made its point. At one moment, Clara's mother stood abruptly and left the courtroom, unable to listen any longer. Reporters captured the image, and it appeared in newspapers the next day with the caption, "A Mother's Grief." In their final address, prosecutors appealed directly to the jury's sense of justice. Clara came to Florida believing she was meeting her future. Instead, she met a man who lied, manipulated, and killed to protect his image. The evidence is undeniable. This was not an accident. This was murder. The defense countered by pleading for mercy. They asked the jury to see Ethan's actions as reckless rather than intentional, framing him as a man who lost control rather than a calculated killer. "Do not let media headlines dictate your verdict," the defense attorney urged. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned. The foreperson stood, hands trembling slightly as the verdict was read: guilty of second-degree murder. Guilty of evidence tampering. Clara's family gasped in relief. Her mother clutched Naomi's hand. Her father, silent for most of the trial, bowed his head and wept openly. Ethan showed little emotion, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. For a man who had once thrived on controlling perceptions, the silence of that moment was crushing. Weeks later, during sentencing, the judge addressed Ethan directly. "You robbed a young woman of her future, her family of their daughter, her students of their teacher. Your actions were selfish, violent, and deliberate. This court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Gasps filled the courtroom once more, but this time it was a collective exhale of closure. Clara's family embraced, though the relief was tempered by the permanence of their loss. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Clara's parents. Through tears, her mother said, "Nothing brings her back, but today we have justice." Naomi, holding back sobs, added, "I hope her story saves someone else from walking into the same danger." On social media, the verdict was met with an outpouring of support. #JusticeForClara trended nationwide. Advocacy groups used the case to push for stricter probation monitoring and greater awareness around online dating safety. As for Ethan, he was escorted from the courtroom in shackles, no longer the man behind the charming messages or staged video calls. He left not as the boyfriend Clara thought she knew, but as a convicted murderer, stripped of the lies that had once shielded him. The trial ended with justice served, but the emptiness left behind was inescapable. Clara's students would never see her smile again. Her family would never hear her voice. Yet her story lived on, a sobering reminder of the risks of misplaced trust and the power of truth in exposing those who prey on it. Thank you for staying with me through Clara's story. It isn't easy to hear, but sharing it matters. Every view, every conversation sparked by her experience, helps remind us that trust is precious, and protecting yourself is never something to be ashamed of. If this story made you pause, if it made you think twice about the choices we make online or the people we let into our lives, let me know. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories reach. And while you're here, don't forget to hit that like button. It lets me know you want more of these real-life cautionary tales. Share this video if you think it might help someone close to you. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications, so you never miss the next story we bring to light. Your support keeps this channel going, and together, we can honor the lives lost by learning from them. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and take care of yourselves.